So, I'm sure most of you have seen or at least know about the release of the first season of Hazbin Hotel on Amazon Prime. If you haven't, bless your lucky souls. Now, before I start my discussion, I need to set up a few house rules. Number 1. Do not send hate to the creator of Hazbin Hotel. I am not encouraging that, and I don't condone hate like that. Number 2. This video isn't intended to insult or attack anyone. These are general critiques and concerns that I have that I felt I should address. Number 3. I personally am Arrow Ace, so along with research, I use my personal experience in this video. I have been in the Arrow Ace community for a long time and have done a lot of research to understand this diverse community. Number 4. Liking this show does not make you a bad person. I am not trying to insult you or call you evil because you like it. It is okay to like media that may be problematic as long as you understand why it is considered problematic. If you are someone who doesn't handle critiques of anything you enjoy, I would recommend not watching this video.
One other caveat I forgot to add is when referring to the people working on Hazbin, I use the names and pronouns that were there at the time I was researching, or if I was unsure I would default to saying they them, so if those were to change at any time, it was after I did my notes. I just wanted to make that clear. I don't mean to misgender anyone, or anything like that.
Now, for the people who have been lucky enough to never hear of this show, I will ruin this luck by directly quoting Wikipedia on the general idea of the show. The series follows Charlie Morningstar, the Princess of Hell, as she sets about fulfilling her seemingly impossible dream of opening a hotel called Hazbin Hotel, which aims to rehabilitate sinners. Due to overpopulation, Hell goes through an annual purge where angels, led by Adam, descend from heaven and kill demons. Charlie finds this upsetting and wants to find a more peaceful solution to the overpopulation problem. Her goal is to have her clients check out from hell as redeemed souls and be accepted into heaven. With the help of her devoted manager and girlfriend, Vaggie, and the reluctant first patron, graphic film actor Angel Dust, she is determined to make her dream become a reality. When her proposal on live television goes awry, her plan attracts the attention of the powerful radio demon Alistair, who, despite finding her belief in redemption laughable, wants to help Charlie run the hotel for his own amusement. A major reason Hazbin was such a big deal was because it was originally an indie project. The pilot episode was able to be made mostly due to crowdfunding. Then it got picked up by Amazon, but Amazon left the pilot episode off of the platform for some reason. The creator of the show, Vivi Medrano, aka VivziePop, has a hell of a lot of controversies. From relying on racial stereotypes for many characters, to not giving POC characters actual ethnic features, to demonizing feminine women, to handling the topic of terribly, and much more, Vivzie has been called out a lot. This particular video is not a discussion of that though. I feel like a lot of people have already discussed her controversies in detail, so for me to do it feels like beating a dead horse. Though, you can let me know in the comments if that is something you would like me to talk about, then I will definitely beat this dead horse. But anyways, the important thing to know is she's been under fire for doing dubious shit for years. So, my lovely watchers, you may be thinking to yourself, if this random YouTuber isn't going to talk about VivziePop's controversies, then what are they going to talk about? My response to that is, why are you pondering what this video is about? Didn't you read the title? You're such a silly goose. The main thing I want to address is this show's very own Tumblr sexy man. Huh? That shouldn't be there. Sorry about that, guys. What? Oh god. What the hell? Oh my god! Ah, There he is. I'm going to be talking about Alistair. I wish I could say I made these lovely photos, but I didn't. I got them off the Instagram account Father's Day 2017. Anyways, if you haven't heard of Alistair, as stated in the Wikipedia page, he gets involved with the hotel by being its benefactor. In the YouTube pilot episode, he is shown getting employees, basically by forcing people who owe him to work there, for the hotel, overall fixing up the place and changing the name from Happy Hotel to Hazbin Hotel, because he's an edgelord like that, I guess. When asked why he wants to help Charlie out, he explains he loves seeing people try hard at something they believe in and failing miserably. Desperate for her idea to work, Charlie accepts his help. So, for the rest of the show, he's directly involved with the hotel, setting him up as an important character. Unfortunately for the horny stans, Alistair is aromantic and asexual, according to the wiki. For those of you who don't know, aromanticism is a queer identity that describes a person with little to no romantic attraction. Similarly, asexuality describes a person who has little to no sexual attraction. People under these spectrums can also be referred to as aspec. There are many microlabels that describe different levels of sexual/romantic attraction to others. For example, demi, gray, cupio, etc. Another way a person can describe their experience is by saying they are romance or sex positive, repulsed, or neutral. For example, I personally am sexually and romantically repulsed, which means I have no interest in pursuing those sorts of relationships. I have a friend who is sex neutral, and the way she describes it is that if it happens, it does, but if it doesn't, she's okay with that. She doesn't feel sexual attraction, but she isn't gets the idea of having sex. Sex-positive aces don't experience sexual attraction, but still may pursue sexual relationships for other feelings like feeling connected to a partner, sex feeling good to said person, or for child conception. A person who isn't asexual is called allosexual, and a person who isn't aromantic is called alloromantic. The term is usually shortened to allo. A person can be asexual and alloromantic, or they can be aromantic and allosexual. These are two separate identities. Now, I say Alistair is aro-ace according to the wiki, because I have to rely on it as a confirmation that it's canon. In the show, it is only vaguely implied, to the point that I only picked up on the quote-unquote hints that are scarcely sprinkled throughout the show because of my knowledge beforehand. I really doubt the average viewer would have picked up on any of this. I know I wouldn't. So instead, I must go to his bio in the wiki to confirm that this is all canon. To put the nail in the coffin, the citations for his sexuality are all varying, random sources. This just further shows that even people editing the wiki admit there is no clear evidence of his sexuality in the fucking show. There are 2 citations for his asexuality. One takes you to a tweet Viv posted for National Coming Out Day. I will come back to that tweet, so keep that in mind. The other citation for asexuality links to a Zoom call with the cast. I will admit I only watched the parts of the video that actually talk about Alistair's sexuality, but I don't feel a need to watch the whole thing for the purpose of this video. The bits of the video about Alistair felt like a slap in the face. First, Viv's whole attitude about his sexuality is upsetting.
Is he canonically asexual? I'm really curious about that.
Yes, canonically, Alistair is asexual.
That's the hard part too, because he's so
think.
sexy and it's just breaking hearts everywhere.
Yeah, I know. I feel like the fact that he's asexual. I always try to be very coy about his. I mean, not about his orientation, because I don't think that I want to be coy about that for any of the characters, but for his his romantic aspect, because I don't want to crush dreams. But there is a canonic direction for that too, and.
Let the shippers.
In a world where there's so little aro-ace rep, hearing a creator be afraid to completely commit to the aro-ace character's identity because it may upset allos is just insulting to me. Allos have a whole catalog of characters they can ship and fantasize about. We don't need to tamper down an A-spec person's identity to make Allos feel comfortable. It's like having a character be canonically gay, but being too afraid to explicitly show it because it may upset straight people. Viv is reverting back to when anti-queer sentiment would cause creators not to make their characters explicitly queer, rather their sexuality was implied. But instead of legal/social pressure causing her to make this decision, she's watering down her character to keep the fans happy. At the end of the clip I showed, one of the people can be heard saying,
"Let the shippers ship."
The person who said this was Kimiko Glenn, who voices the character Nifty in the show. Sorry, I struggled trying to figure who was talking at this point.
which I'm assuming is referring to a controversy that happened with Alastor. People were starting to get upset that Hazbin Hotel fans were still openly shipping Alastor with other characters without any consideration of his A-spec identity. Instead of Viv defending the A-spec community and their allies with this concern, she called them bullies and said, "Let people ship whoever they want." Now, I understand we can't stop people from shipping romance-repulsed aromantic characters with other characters. I know we can't stop people from writing smutty fan fictions about sex-repulsed characters. But a creator can try to emphasize that this character is A-spec and be mindful of it. Instead, most of the stuff fans make online about Alastor is about either simping for him or shipping him with someone else. It makes me wonder if these people are ignoring his identity or simply just don't know he's Aro Ace. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. It's not like it's very clear in the show. This sort of attitude with the creator in the fandom just completely erases his identity. It doesn't matter what the wiki says if no one actually takes it seriously. That's what exactly is happening in this fandom. I also see that when people get called out for doing this, they will try to make the argument that Alastor could be demisexual, gray, romantic, etc. That may be the case, but if you're only bringing that up so you can have an excuse to ship him with someone, that isn't a valid argument. Referring back to the Zoom interview, the voice actor of Alastor in the pilot episode, Edward Roscoe, sort of goes to the defense of the A-spec community.
Can have their fun.
Can I offer
for
a
now.
counterpoint to that?
Yes.
So there have actually been some people specifically on both the YouTube comments and have just tweeted me directly that have said, thank you so much for making Alastor Ace, because it's nice to feel like I'm represented in media. So for every broken heart of somebody who's like, man, I really want to date Alastor, there's an equal subsect, or probably not an equal subsect because it's an underrepresented subsect, but there's a lot of people out there who are asexual or who don't know what asexual is, who might see that character and go, oh, that's exactly how I feel. Thank you for helping me figure it all out.
Now, I'm glad he has this sort of attitude. There's just one problem. He's making the assumption a lot of people make. The idea that asexuality means no romantic and no sexual attraction. For years, the A-spec community has been arguing that love does not equal sex. That's why we have two different identities for sex and romance. You can't use them interchangeably. Hazbin Hotel and its cast is furthering this misconception that asexuality encompasses both sex and romance, but it doesn't. That is an identity specifically describing sexual attraction. The fact that the voice actor of Alastor doesn't even know this is very concerning, and that inaccurate description is directly linked to Alastor's sexuality in his wiki bio. This is an issue because if someone does go to that link, they will get misinformed about what it means to be ace. Some people may argue that, oh, they didn't know because Aro and Ace are lesser known identities. They may not be as known as other ones, but if you're going to make an A-spec character, you have to do your research. There's no excuse. I think even the VA should know this, but I can see why some people may disagree. That doesn't excuse Viv not putting the effort in. If she did, she could have corrected him in that live stream, but she didn't. Now, to the citation of Alastor's aromanticism. What's so funny to me is aromantic is in brackets on his wiki. It's strangely poetic. It's like a visual representation on how society, even the queer aspect of it, treats aromanticism. The citation says that Alistair was confirmed to be Arrow, not by Viv, but by a former illustrator of the show, in another live stream. What really puts the icing on the cake is the fact that the live video doesn't exist anymore. If you try to go to any sort of link for it, it just says the video no longer exists. All that is left is an abridged transcript. One of the first things is that is on said transcript is disclaimer. This is not a full transcript of the stream. This information may become outdated at any time for various reasons. The two most common reasons are that lore changes as time progresses, and that Faust is giving a second-hand account of what she knows. Please consider that when reading this information. So when reading this transcript, no one can be sure what is and isn't still canon. In addition, the document is 6 pages long, and it wasn't until I got to the 4th page that I found any mentions of aromanticism. It says, and I quote, "Fatis will not say if Alistair is a virgin or not, for the sake of respecting people who are aromantic and or asexual and are inspired by Alistair." A single sentence in a 6-page document. Also, this wording is very vague. It could sound like Fatis wasn't necessarily saying Alistair is Arrow, but they know he resonates with a lot of Arrow people. They could also simply be saying he is actually Arrow Ace. The fact the message of the statement is so hazy makes this a terrible source. It all feels like some sort of weird joke. Disregarding the tweet again, I'll get back to that. The two main pieces of evidence that make Alistair canonically Arrow Ace either doesn't exist anymore, save for a heavily abridged version of it, or isn't accurately describing the orientation. They're not even instances that are in the show. It's giving J.K. Rowling saying Dumbledore is gay when there's basically nothing in the novels that imply that. Also, before people start taking shit out of context, I'm not saying Viv is equal to J.K. Rowling. Joanne Rowling is an awful person and would take a lot for me to say someone is the same as her. I have issues with Viv, but I do not think she is at the same level as J.K. Rowling. Now back to what I was saying. Okay, so what about the show? What are the hints that are dropped there? Well, one thing is, whenever Angel Dust makes any sexual comments towards Alistair, he says no. But most people say no to Angel's sexual advances. Even his love interest, Husk, does. So it doesn't mean anything to Alistair's orientation if other non-aspec people do it. Probably the biggest hint is at the tail end of the series. The Exorcist, led by Adam, basically declares war on Hazbin Hotel. To get backup, Alistair takes Charlie to the part of hell that cannibals live. There, he asks his friend Rosie for help. During this exchange, she says,
"Oh, who's this you brought with you? Come now, Alistair, she's much too young for you. Oh, I'm just kidding. I know you're an ace in the hole."
A what now?
I've been in the ace community for a long time, around 6 years, and I have never heard the term ace in the hole used to refer to aspec people. It's like the writers looked up phrases with the word ace in it and thought they really did something. For the record, they did not. There are so many other things they could have used, but they used a phrase that doesn't even mean anything about asexuality. In reality, ace in the hole means you have a secret advantage in something, similar to saying you have a trick up your sleeve. What's funny about this is there are a lot of things that asexual people have claimed as ace culture. To name a few: garlic bread, cake, dragons, taking over Denmark. If the team truly wanted to represent Alistair with a few hints, they could have shown him making garlic bread or an Arrow Ace colored cake. It would have worked with his character because Alistair supposedly likes to bake and cook. I know that's a corny example, but it would have shown that the team did some semblance of research into the community. Instead, we have this, a poorly researched character. As I have been bringing up throughout this section of the video, Alistair's identity wasn't researched well. Along with the vague hints in the show I discussed, the team relies on stereotypes to present his Arrow Ace representation. Okay, so this may sound like a big accusation for me to say. Don't worry, I have receipts to back up this claim. To figure out if Alistair falls into Arrow Ace stereotypes, I first looked into the most common ones that are put on characters. I have my own ideas of what these stereotypes would look like, but I also wanted to see what other people considered. I've looked on multiple asexual and aromantic forums to see what other aspec people, besides myself, see as Arrow Ace stereotypes. I also asked my aspec followers on Instagram what they considered stereotypes as well, and I was able to compile a list. I also added photos, most of them stock photos, that relate to each stereotype. The general consensus for stereotypes I got were cold, distant, heartless and a lack of empathy. I grouped these stereotypes into 2 pictures because I felt like it. I put the alligator one on here too because when I looked up stock photos of Heartless, I saw like 2 pictures of gators, which just seems out of nowhere. I guess I can see because they're apex predators, so they're heartless because they're violent, but like, they're just chillin', trying to survive, you know? Next one, alien or inhuman. This one isn't a stock photo, but of course I had to use Zuck. Being Arrow Ace because of trauma. I really didn't want to look up a stock photo of trauma, so there's no picture for this one. Selfish. I'm very glad such a sexy pic came up for this one. Romance and sex repulsed. I feel the Arrow Ace flag is an appropriate enough picture for this one. I just don't want to use more of my printer ink. Antisocial and or introverted. And last but not least, being infantilized or clueless in any way. Yes, I had to use the Ice Age baby for this one. Let's go down the list for Alistair, shall we? Is he cold and distant? Alistair likes to keep his cards close to his chest, which makes him emotionally distant to everyone else in the show. While he does have a few friends, Mimsy and Rosie, he kicks Mimsy out of the hotel, which does not strike me as something a close friend does. But Rosie is the only one he connects with. While that may strike against the claim that he's cold and distant, it doesn't dispute the way he acts the rest of the show. In the episode we see him and Rosie interact, he seems out of character the entire time. One could argue it is character development, but as someone who has watched the show, I say it's a giant plot hole to keep the plot going. Whatever the case, having one close friend does not dismiss a character from being cold and distant. Is he heartless? Alistair is the definition of heartless. His wiki literally says he has an odd sense of morality, which is described as, quote, not normal and has been noted to be quite sadistic, even cannibalistic, devouring lesser demons or those that have incurred his anger. This alone screams heartless. If he truly did have a heart, which could be hard because he is a literal demon, he probably wouldn't eat those who angered him or he deemed less than. That's not even mentioning what he does in the series. I could give you a whole ass list pertaining to him being heartless. And I will. First of all, he's a serial killer. This is completely canon. I do not think I need to elaborate on that one. He also just likes to see others suffer. His only reason for helping Charlie with Hazbin and the whole point of the show is because he wants to see her fail. In Hell, he broadcasts the screams of his victims for all to hear. Maybe this is a hot take, but these all seem like heartless attributes to have. Does he lack empathy? I think my examples for why he's cold, distant, and heartless are also examples of how he lacks empathy. I think the attributes I just stated above all go hand in hand, because if you have empathy, it's hard to be mean and heartless. To add, if you feel this way about others, you're most likely going to be cold and distant too. I know that sometimes cold and distant characters are like that because they're socially awkward, or there's more of an explanation, but that's not really the case here. So, for cold, distant, and heartless, and lack of empathy, I would say yes, he fits the bill. Is he an alien or inhuman? Although he is a demon, I will let this one slide, since he used to be human, and basically everyone in this show is a demon or just non-human. So for simplicity, I will say no. Is he Arrow Ace because of his trauma? Who knows? We know none of his backstory besides basic information as of now. Is he selfish? His only motivation for helping out at Hazbin is for his own personal amusement. If he had nothing else to gain, he wouldn't have bothered, which is a selfish motivation to have. On his wiki it says, quote, he is noted to be narcissistic, with his love for himself being stated that no one can measure up to. From how this quote is worded, I'm assuming they're not saying he has narcissistic personality disorder, rather they're using narcissist as an adjective, and narcissists in this context are considered selfish. Another thing that occurred to me while editing this video is the quote I just used from his wiki, that his love for himself is so great that no one else can measure up to it. I really don't like how this attribute is put onto an Aro Ace character, the only A-spec character in the show, mind you. It just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Is he antisocial or an introvert? I personally would argue he is. I know that being an introvert and being antisocial aren't exactly the same, but I wanted to group them together because I have similar reasons for thinking he's both of these. Now, let me be clear that I don't think he's shy. He can easily go up and talk to someone if he wants to. The thing is, I feel he only talks to people for two specific reasons. One, he gains something from it. Two, to threaten them. I'm sure there are examples of him talking to people not just for those reasons, but majority of the time that is why he reaches out to people. In addition, he doesn't seem to have a desire to talk and connect with others. Even when talking to other overlords of hell, the conversation is impersonal and most of the time short. Is he romance and sex repulsed? With the way Viv describes his sexuality, I would think so. Also, the clip with Rosie I showed earlier, play it again.
Oh, who's this you brought with you? Come now, Alistair. She's much too young for you. Oh, I'm just kidding. I know you're an ace in the hole.
A what now?
Rosie is basically saying she doesn't actually think Charlie and him are dating because he's asexual, which, again, has nothing to do with romantic attraction. Although the wrong term is being used, Rosie is definitely saying he has no interest in romance. Also, it's clear his rejection of Angel's sexual advances is meant to show he's sex repulsed. I feel like if it wasn't, they would have elaborated on it. Although they aren't actually fucking clear on what part of the ace spectrum he's on, I'm gonna say it's a safe bet to assume he's meant to be romance and sex repulsed. Also, in general, the fact that it's honestly hard to tell what part of the ace spectrum he's on goes to show how badly his identity is written as well. There are ways that you can show someone's aspectness without even explicitly saying it. Though I understand if you feel this is an unfair thing to put as a stereotype. There are people who are both romance and sex repulsed. Hell, I'm one of them. I do agree this is a stereotype though. The issue is only having characters being repulsed of both things leaves out the other aspect identities. People want to see themselves in characters, and Aro Ace is only one small part of the aspect community. Only seeing romance and sex repulsed characters in media also creates the misconception that you can't be anything in between. The ace spectrum is complex, and people want that to be shown in characters. In addition, I think it shows a lot of times that the creators of these characters didn't take the time to thoroughly research aspect identities, which obviously isn't good. I'm not saying every person who has made a character that is romance and sex repulsed doesn't do their research. It's just a common pattern I see. But yeah, overall, Alistair fits the stereotype. Lastly, is he infantilized and or clueless about his identity? Fuck yeah. Viv loves to make a point that Alistair doesn't know what asexual means. On the tweet she posted that confirmed he's asexual, it literally says that. She likes to say it's because he's from the 30s and he doesn't understand these modern terms, which I suppose I understand, but the term asexual was not recently created. Even if it was, do you truly think that in the hypersexual world we live in, he wouldn't notice he was different compared to the general population? Hell, I grew up in a way more queer-tolerant world than he would have, and I still felt different from everyone else. And I didn't understand for a long time. But guess what? Different names for queer people have existed for many, many years. This is the part of the video where I get historical. Now, it may seem overkill to do such a deep dive in history to prove a point about a fictional character, but I think it's important to. I have said this repeatedly in my Pride series, which if you're interested, go check that out. I probably say it way too much in that, so sorry about that, but it is a point that I want to hammer home, that it is a huge misconception that queer history is extremely modern, that queer people didn't group together and create a community until the 1960s, during the Civil Rights era. In addition to this, a lot of people assume that the general population didn't know a lot about nor see queer people in public until recently. This simply isn't true, and more people need to understand this. For example, this letter written to sexologist and queer rights activist Magnus Hirschfeld, who I also did a Pride series video about. Quote, "The world of sexual inverts is what queer people referred to themselves at the time, is indeed a large one in any American city, and it is a community distinctly organized, words, customs, traditions of its own, and every city has number of meeting places. Queer people like the ones described in the letter have been largely erased from history, and we can't keep letting this happen." A lot of people dismiss the queer experience on the idea of that there weren't things like that back in the day, but there were. There always have been. Vivian saying that since Alistair is from an older time period he doesn't know about queer terms is contributing to this misconception, which is why I take this so seriously. Let's start with general queer history. So this goes back way before the topics I'm going to discuss, but I'm going to stick to the time frame that Alistair would have been alive. I also mostly focus my research on American history because he lived in New Orleans, USA. He died in 1933. His age when he died was around 30s, 40s. So earliest he would have been born would be around 1890 and the latest 1903. With that in mind, my main focus is going to be the 1800s to 1930s in America. I will go out of this time range a little and we'll talk about other countries, but generally, this is what I was looking for when researching. Even before the modern terms that are used today, queer people had ways of describing themselves. Here is less than a handful of terms that were used. Friend of Dorothy, sexual invert, flit, Mary, urinin, shirt lifter, and there were even asexual exclusive terms like anesthesia sexual, anaphrodite. I will go back to asexual history later on. You know the man Magnus Hirschfeld I mentioned a little bit before this? Well, in 1919, he founded the Institute of Sexual Science in Berlin, Germany. This was a safe haven for queer people. They could go there for support. For example, it was the first clinic to offer transition surgery to trans people. It was a place where people could learn more about queerness, and it was dedicated to the research and advocacy for the LGBTQIA. Hirschfeld also wrote many books based on the research of the Institute. He even wrote books about sexology before the clinic opened and after it closed. He did many tours around the world about his findings, and did multiple in America. So it wasn't like his ideas were only known in Germany and nowhere else. It also wouldn't be out of the question for Alistair to hear about this clinic and Hirschfeld's findings. Again, if you want to learn more about Magnus Hirschfeld and other historical queer figures, check out my Pride series videos on YouTube. I post them during June, and I'm hoping to post way more than I have been during that month. I started this series 2 Junes ago, and at that time these videos were literally minute-long reels, and the audio on them were awful. I have how I want this series to go pretty figured out now, so next June I should have way more better quality videos. Anyways, enough off-topic yapping. Okay, next I'm going to talk about 1920s America. If Alistair died when he was 30, he would have been in his late teens around this time, and also in his 20s. So he'd be at an age to understand important events happening around him. During the 20s, many people moved to cities for better job opportunities, queer people included. This caused queer subculture to develop in urban areas. Alistair lived in New Orleans, a pretty large city. Drag balls, aka drag shows, would be publicly held in cities, and mainstream newspapers wrote about them. People of all races and genders, cis or not, participated in these balls. Another result of people migrating to American cities was the Harlem Renaissance. Quote, the Harlem Renaissance was an intellectual and cultural revival of African American music, dance, art, fashion, literature, theater, politics, and scholarship centered in Harlem, Manhattan, which is in New York City. The faces of the Harlem Renaissance were overtly queer and were a big influence on drag balls becoming as mainstream as they did. Alistair would have followed things that were created throughout this Renaissance because one thing he is said to enjoy directly came out of this movement: jazz. A lot of jazz musicians of the time were openly queer and would often cross-dress for their performances. Even the predecessor of jazz, the blues, had female singers like Gladys Fatso Bentley, Ma Rainey, Ethel Waters, and Lucille Bogan, who were all queer. If he is a huge fan of this genre, it would make sense for him to know the culture and the people contributing to it. In turn, he would know they were queer and what being queer is. To add to this, the city that he lived in, New Orleans, had its own queer community. I had a bit of a hard time finding very solid facts about the New Orleans queer community, except for one source, so I apologize for that. If any of you know places with more information, please let me know. At the end of World War I, which was 1918, the French Quarter of the city was in complete disrepair. For those of you who don't know, the French Quarter is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, and this whole section is considered a National Historical Landmark, which is an actual title that the American government gives to sites that have an outstanding historical significance. Post the war, the French Quarter was in such bad shape, the rest of the city shunned it. The French Quarter didn't have life breathed back into it until queer people in the area flocked there. There, they made their own little community. Thanks to this community, the French Quarter was revived. Many of the residents at the time worked to restore it to its former glory. In addition, New Orleans' treatment of the Prohibition laws was considered to be one of the most lax in the country. In the French Quarter, many nightclubs and bars were open. In most cities during this era, speakeasies would be set up, where from a casual glance it'd be hard to tell the place was an actual bar. New Orleans was different though. Many of these places did not try to hide the fact they were bars and nightclubs. The government also couldn't regulate these bars and prohibit gay bars because any sort of purchasing alcohol was illegal. This allowed a lot of queer bars protection and allowed the queer scene in New Orleans to flourish even more. Alistair lived in a city that had a huge queer community. By just living there, he would have at least some vague idea of what being queer was. Trying to argue he wouldn't is a blatant disregard of history. He also enjoys alcohol and jazz, which would both be at bars. So it would make sense he'd go to the French Quarter. Also, to turn things a little darker, wouldn't a bar be a perfect place for a serial killer to find their next victim? I wouldn't be surprised if he used them as a hunting grounds of sorts. Now on to aromantic and asexual history. There are a few issues with trying to find people in history who are asexual and aromantic. First, scholars only recently have put those two identities into account when studying history. Another issue with aromanticism is that the perception we have of marriage and love is very different to how people perceived it in history. For a long time, marriage wasn't a bond of love. Instead, people married for opportunities like climbing up the social ladder, money, etc. So there may be people who were aro that were married because marriage wasn't always perceived as something romantic. In the same vein, the modern perception of marriage, including romance, has the added assumption that sex equals love. So there is a lack of research pertaining to romantic attraction. There are still some instances of aromanticism in history though. Patriarchal societies in history made it very difficult for women to live on their own. So there are many instances of communities being built for women who wanted to stay single across multiple cultures. For example, around the 1640s during the Qing dynasty in China, a community called the Golden Orchard Society was established. This was a place where women who didn't want marriage could live. this society lasted for around 300 years. In the 1200s, Flanders communities known as béguinage were set up for spinster women to live. These examples aren't to say men weren't or can't be aro, it's just that it wasn't as much as a statement for men not to marry. They could also live on their own without much issue. Again, the fact that there aren't many records of aromanticism in history isn't because it wasn't there, it's just a perception of love and relationships were different back then. Now to asexual. The issue with finding ace historical figures is sexual attraction is a very behind closed doors topic, especially in the time periods I will be bringing up. The only way we can figure out if anyone in the past was ace is we would need to find documents or accounts where they describe their sex life in terms similar to the modern definition of asexuality. So many figures that are thought to be asexual are more speculation. Also, we can never truly be sure how many other people are ace, simply because they never spoke about it with other people or documented records of it weren't preserved. There's more documentation of asexuality in history compared to aromanticism, though. The word asexual was first coined by a queer rights activist named Emma Tross in 1897. She described asexuality in her novel Homosexuality in Relation to Marriage and the Question of Women's Rights. In this book, she acknowledges the existence of people we would now call asexual or demisexual, and she also writes that she herself identifies as one of them. For reference, if Alistair was in his 40s when he died, he would have been born around the time this book was published. Even before the term asexual was coined, there are written documents of people experiencing asexuality. The next person I want to talk about that is speculated to be asexual, I have a little caveat with. A lot of people speculate she is ace, but the evidence they show support the idea that she lacks romantic attraction, which is how aro people feel, not ace. I assume the people who argue she's ace are making the assumption that being ace also means you're aro. So, I put this under the ace history because all the sources I saw stated she was ace, but I personally would think it would make more sense to say she was aro. The woman I'm talking about is named Catherine Bernard. Catherine Bernard has been largely forgotten by history. No one is completely sure what year she was born or the year she died. She was a 17th century author who primarily wrote tragic plays, but also wrote poetry and novels as well. Her works have won many awards and were well respected by many critics. The themes in her works are specifically the reason many speculate her to be aspec. Most of her works have the underlying message that love never ends well. In addition, when depicting romance, she wrote it as an observer rather than someone who truly knew these feelings. When looking at her work, there is reasonable speculation that she was aro in some way. Next person was part of a social movement that has many ties with asexuality. Elizabeth Wolstenholme was an activist that fought for women's equality. She fought against sexual discrimination, advocated for women to own their own property, and was a suffragette. She was part of a movement known as the Social Purist. Social purity activism describes a period of woman-led activism during the late 19th century and into the 20th century. Quote, social purity activists worked, among other things, to raise the age of consent and lawful sex work and sexual violence against women, further temperance, and generally change perception of traditional gender roles. Many of these women were also against sex, believing that it contributed to female subjugation. Majority of these women saw the ideal relationship as full of compassion, love, and equality, but also sexless. This sentiment is very similar to how many allo aces feel about romantic relationships. The next person I'm going to talk about wasn't personally asexual, but he did record instances of asexuality. William Alexander Hamilton, not the one the play's about, was a medical reformist who followed the idea of Florence Nightingale, that medical procedures in hospitals needed to be in a clean, sanitized environment. In his novel, Sexual Impotence in the Male and Female, he writes about 4 patients who lack sexual attraction. His findings state, Mr. W, aged 33, a strong, well-built, and apparently healthy man, consulted me, December 11th, 1860, in order, as he said, to ascertain if anything could be done for him. He stated that he had never experienced the slightest desire for sexual intercourse, nor any venereal excitement, though the latter he had repeatedly, by reading libidinous books in association with lewd women, endeavored to produce. So far, however, from the wished-for effect resulting, the consequence was always the opposite, his repugnance increasing. From this statement, it sounds like this patient was sexually repulsed. Another patient was a woman. In his account of her states, there was no aversion to sexual intercourse, and at times she had derived pleasurable sensations therefrom. But this did not excite desire for repetition of the act. Neither did the caresses of her husband develop erotic feelings. This account sounds similar to aces who are sex positive or sex neutral. Although he sees these cases as health issues, findings clearly document aspec people in the late 1800s. This also proves that Alistair would have been aware he was different, because this was written in the 1800s, and Alistair lived in the 1900s. So, hello. The history topics I just discussed are only the surface of an expansive iceberg. Again, I only focused on American history between the 1800s to 1920s. With that narrow of a time period, I still was able to find a plethora of information about queer history. Imagine how much more there is. Over the centuries, people like the ones I've mentioned have risked their lives to live an authentic life. They fought so that queer people in the future would have it easier than they did. Others didn't even realize there were more people like them, and lived their whole lives thinking something was wrong with them. I can't imagine how lonely that would be. For many years, bigots have ensured that their stories were buried so they'd be forgotten. Despite all the suppression and ignoring of the truth, these people's stories have come to light. Fellow queer people have started to tell this important part of history. Although queer history still isn't part of standard historical education, it's a start. And to make sure this information becomes widely known, the queer community and its allies need to keep talking about these stories. Vivian's show is about dead souls in hell. Most of these people were born before modern times. Literally, the characters central to the plot were born before the 1960s. Pentious died in the 1800s, Alistair died in the 1930s, Angel died in the 1940s, Nifty died in the 50s, Husk died in the 70s, but was in his 60s/70s when he died. It is the perfect setting to talk about this lesser known part of the past. Instead of putting the time in to do the research, she doesn't acknowledge this rich history. She didn't want to put the effort that was needed for her characters. She should have had made them live closer to the present. Yes, research is a lot of work, but it's what you have to do to make a good story. It also ensures that people from the past are treated with respect. Viv should have treated the historical aspects of her show delicately and thoroughly, but she didn't. Instead, she is spreading misinformation that in the long run harms the queer community. Now, I'm not saying Vivian is purposely doing this. I'm sure she doesn't know about this part of history. Just because it wasn't her intention, though, doesn't stop the harm it is perpetuating. But yeah, these are my reasons as to why I believe Alistair is an actually good Aro Ace representation. I wanted to make this video because I see so many people say Alistair is good rep, which surprises me. I sort of get the vibe a lot of people are saying this because they're just happy to actually see a canon Aro Ace character and are looking over the flaws with his identity. Just because there isn't a lot of rep for us out there doesn't mean we should settle for less. In order to ensure we will get that proper rep, we need to hark on creators so they will actually put the time into understanding us. We deserve to see people like us in media, and we deserve to see ourselves be portrayed accurately. I hope that in the next season, Viv will tweak Alistair's character to be a more authentic Aro Ace character, but considering she had 4 years to decide what she wanted for the first season of the show to be like, and this is how it turned out, I don't have high hopes.
Hello, I'm recording this part of the video after I've moved back into my dorm. And funny enough, I forgot to pack my mic. So I had to improvise on the audio for this part. So please excuse the funky quality of it. Anyways, y'all, it's a very special year in the US of A. It's an election year. So I must do my obligatory PSA to tell those who are eligible to vote. Please do it. If you ever find yourself thinking, oh, it won't matter anyways, I'm not gonna bother, stop. No. It does matter. If you're in a marginalized group, please remember that people fought and died to give you the ability to vote. If you don't feel the need to vote for yourself, at least do it for the people who fought for you to have this opportunity. Things will never change if you don't do anything about it. So please, please, on November 5th, go out and vote. There's still time to register to vote, and there are many resources that you can use to see if you're registered and where your polling office is. The big one is vote.gov. Another very good resource is votelikeabeast.com. I'll put the link to these websites in my description and any other resources that I find helpful for this.
I hope you enjoyed this video. I know I learned a lot while making it. I have a lot of strong opinions on Hazbin Hotel, and I plan on doing a series of sorts to talk about various critiques I have. If you're interested in that, or if you like reading, check out my other videos. I make videos reviewing books. I also have an Instagram, a Patreon, and a Storygraph, which I will show the ads on the screen. I also have a Etsy shop where I sell jewelry. See you in the next video. Mwah.